Hello. This hopefully short lecturette is on Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, and especially parts 1 and 2, chapters 13 through 16, and roughly 17 to the end of 30 in part 2. Okay, fun facts about Hobbes. I won't go too much into it because everybody has access to Wikipedia these days. He was born 1588, deceased 1679. He was educated at Oxford. After graduating from Oxford, he went on to work for the Cavendish family, initially as a tutor for William Cavendish, who later became the second Earl of Devonshire. Hobbes would work for the same family most of the rest of his life. His work for the Cavendish family is part of what allowed Hobbes to think and write as he did. It gave him access to books and connections to other philosophers and scientists. His earlier work, De Cive, was published in 1642, and then his most famous work, the topic of this lecturette, is, of course, the Leviathan, and is a royalist and absolutist work. He found himself rather on the wrong side of the English Civil War in the 1640s that saw the rise of Cromwell and all of that excitement from the time. And he fled to the continent, living in exile in Paris from about 1640 to 1651. The Leviathan was written during his exile, possibly with Jean Baudin's famous Six Books of the Republic nearby, and published in 1651. So, writing almost a century after Etienne de la Boétie, and La Boétie's wonderfully sort of fiery discourse on voluntary servitude, I think one could be forgiven for finding very little in common between Hobbes and Hobbes' sort of famously somewhat authoritarian, almost sounding sovereign Leviathan, and Etienne de la Boétie's exaltation of humanity's natural freedom. Yet, recall that the notion of natural freedom that La Boétie had put forward was not an obvious or given fact for all thinkers prior to La Boétie. Think of St. Thomas Aquinas, who, specifically addressing the question of whether there is domination in nature, that is in the Garden of Eden, concludes that yes, in fact, there was domination of Adam over Eve, and thus some form of rule is both natural and, like everything else in the created universe, ordained by God. Or recall Aristotle, whose argument for the theoretical naturalness of slavery and the existence of natural slaves, at least in the abstract, is ultimately founded on his understanding of human nature as involving the rule of logos or reason over the passions or baser instincts and whims. Indeed, for Aristotle, using reason to work out how to rule, that is, how to make judgments about questions of justice in both the general case of law and the particular cases of law's application, is what it means to be human. We are the animal whose unique telos is politics. We are the political animal, at least for Aristotle. But for both La Boétie and now Hobbes, we are categorically and constitutively, the free animal, not the political animal. Hobbes thus imagines human nature as existing separable from politics. Hobbes imagines human nature as made up of our natural, individual faculties and sentiments. This is not unlike La Boétie, who was also interested in defining humans by our natural freedom coupled with our natural amitié. However, where La Boétie was satisfied to merely make his declarations about natural freedom, Hobbes sets out to think methodically and systematically about what that means. And thus, he starts with a thought exercise you will see replicated in future social contract thinkers, this imagined state of nature. So what is the state of nature as a thought exercise, and what is Hobbes' state of nature specifically? It will vary depending on the thinker, but the state of nature is usually put forward by a thinker as an actual distant point in ancient human prehistory, prior to the development of anything that resembles society or politics. Today, we might call it speculative history, but I suspect that even to some of the thinkers who use the state of nature in their thought, the question of its actual historicity is secondary to its utility in their reasoning. That is to say, there may be no proof as to whether humans ever existed prior to society or politics of some sort. And certainly it would be hard to imagine how you would prove one account of that time over another. Yet it's a useful hypothetical setting if one wants to imagine a human being in her most atomized and individualized willing form. The human in the state of nature, whatever else he may be, and we will see varying accounts from Locke and Rousseau soon enough, is an individual willing agent of some sort. And this willing agent is, by definition in the state of nature, not constrained in any way by any social or political structures of any sort. This is the freest of free human wills set loose on the natural world. What would such a free human do? How would it behave? Imagining the setting of the state of nature, allows us to imagine such a hypothetically unfettered and free human will and body. This is like taking Lavoisier's Declaration of Natural Human Freedom to its most extreme theoretical end, or rather beginning. Thinking about humans in this way, instead of, say, the way that Aristotle thinks of them, kind of turns politics and society into a problem in need of explanation. There is such a distance between the imagined setting of the state of nature with the unfettered individual freedom of a human plunked into that state, and our own lives so highly constrained socially and legally in political societies, that one needs to provide a story of how we could possibly have gotten from there to here. So what does Hobbes put into his state of nature, and how do we get out of it? Well, he imagines such a thing as natural right, as the content of human freedom. So the way that Hobbes uses the term right might be confusing for those of us more used to hearing it as a kind of normative demand, especially since the post-World War II development of declarations and notions of human rights. I think it would be misleading to read Hobbes's use of the term right to mean that this is something humans ought to have in the state of nature. This is not a normative right in that sense. Rather, he's imagining what would be the actual possibilities of an unfettered human being in a situation with no legal, social, or religious coercions or constraints of any sort. What could such a person do, really physically do, in that state of being? According to Hobbes, he, and it's always imagined as a he, could basically do anything physically possible for a human being to do. The only constraints are physical, as in physics constraints, including those imposed by other random humans he might encounter. This translates into what Hobbes calls a right to all things. This is the famous Hobbesian natural right of all to all. This is to say that anything the human being can physically take, he can take. Anywhere that he can physically go, he can go. Hobbes assumes our primary underlying self-interest, or desire to remain alive, of course. And so our natural right is to do anything and everything we deem necessary to effect that end. Or in Hobbes's language, quoting from chapter 14, the right of nature, which writers commonly call jus naturale, is the liberty each man hath to use his own power as he will himself for the preservation of his own nature, that is to say, of his own life, and consequently of doing anything which, in his own judgment and reason, he shall conceive to be the aptest means thereunto. End quote. Sounds straightforward enough, but Hobbes thinks through the consequences of this right. It's entirely possible for me to go around taking whatever I want from any other human I happen to encounter, and of course any other animal and any other thing, if I can physically overpower them anyway. And since us humans are also naturally prone to quarrel, Recall in chapter 13, Hobbes remarks that, quote, in the nature of man, we find three principal causes of quarrel. First, competition. Secondly, diffidence. Thirdly, glory. Hobbes imagines that when you combine our naturally quarrelsome nature with a situation of unfettered freedom, that right of all to all things, you wind up with what he calls a state of war. The Hobbesian state of war does not mean that every single day is a battle like the Battle of Ypres, but rather that it is not a state of stable peace. Every single encounter with another free human in the state of nature could be your last. It very realistically could be a fight to the death, either for some thing you happen to be carrying at the time, or simply because of the free whim of the other person you encounter who happens to feel like proving his strength against yours that day. Thus, life in the state of nature is famously described by Hobbes as, quote, nasty, brutish, and short. But Hobbes also imagines reason to be innate, to be an innate natural faculty of humans. We need it in order to be self-interested, right? That is, we need to be able to reason out what we need to do to keep ourselves alive. We need to use our reason to observe and understand the natural world around us in order to keep ourselves fed, sheltered, etc. The fact of innate reason makes Hobbes conclude that there would actually be a kind of natural law that humans would wind up observing in the state of nature. Again, much like with natural right, he does not mean that this is a kind of law that would be enforced by a state, but rather that we would use our reason to deduce a general law or laws based on those actions that predictably lead to our death versus working out those actions and ways of acting that do not or are less likely to lead to our death. In Hobbes's language, quoting again from chapter 14, a law of nature, lex naturalis, is a precept or general rule found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, or taketh away the means of preserving the same, and to omit that by which he thinketh it may be best preserved. This is how Hobbes, seemingly paradoxically at first glance, logically concludes that in this state of nature, that is a state of war, humans would deduce or discern a fundamental natural law, quote, to seek peace and follow it, end quote, which comes with the other fundamental law, which is the defensive law, should that peace-seeking thing not work out, quote, by all means we can defend ourselves, end quote. So after identifying these fundamental laws, Hobbes goes on to outline how, purely deriving from our own self-interest, natural humans could have a kind of natural contract with each other. Again, not something enforced by a court or human laws. There's no police to call should someone break their contract here, but rather a kind of mutually beneficial arrangement that will hold so long as both parties do indeed continue to find it mutually beneficial. Recall that the right of nature is the liberty each man hath to use his own power as he will himself. Our will is a key part of natural right, and this allows Hobbes to imagine that we can will a suspension or transfer of that right, even in the state of nature. This is the stuff of natural contracts. So I might suspend or transfer my right to go take all your smoked fish while you're out hunting, say, on either the tacit or explicit understanding that you will reciprocally suspend your right to take my secret cache of food while I'm off hunting. This is a mutually beneficial situation because we can avoid killing each other, even though it does mean having to do a little bit more work in the short term to get ourselves fed. Underneath it all is thus this fear and self-interest that animates human existence in the state of nature. Yet these natural covenants are nevertheless binding, and according to Hobbes, the basis of the only kind of natural justice. Quoting from chapter 15 now, and in this law of nature consisteth the fountain and original of justice. For where no covenant hath preceded, there hath no right been transferred, and every man has right to everything, and consequently no action can be unjust. But when a covenant is made, then to break it is unjust, and the definition of injustice is no other than the not performance of covenant. And whatsoever is not unjust is just. End quote. Hobbes goes on to enumerate a variety of natural laws and situations that can get pretty complicated, all in the state of nature still, in chapter 15. It may seem dense, but I urge you to read it carefully. He then proceeds to discuss and define what he means by a person. Again, it might seem like he's being pedantic, but it's really worth reading carefully. I promise the discussion is important. He begins with the definition, quote, "A person is he whose words or actions are considered either as his own or as representing the words or actions of another man, or of any other thing to whom they are attributed, whether truly or by fiction," end quote. And that's from chapter 16. And then Hobbes gives this fascinating account of how personhood is in some sense a form of representation. There's always a distance between the person and what or who the person represents. This allows Hobbes to make the key distinction between a natural person, which is when the person is representing the individual it claims to be representing. So when I speak my own thoughts in my own name, that's me, that's the natural person representing me, versus an artificial or feigned person, which is, quote, when they are considered as representing the words and actions of another, right? My representative here, you could be a person representing someone else. It is through the artificial personhood, this artificial personhood, that a multitude could come to be represented in any form. As Hobbes notes, quote, "A multitude of men are made one person when they are, by one man or one person, represented, so that it be done with the consent of every one of that multitude in particular. For it is the unity of the representer, not the unity of the represented, that maketh the person one. And it is the representer that beareth the person, and but one person. And unity cannot otherwise be understood in multitude," end quote. It's worth noting at this point that he does not speak of a united people here, but really still a multitude, even if personated by a single representative. He then gets into how the aggregate opinions of a multitude sort of cancel each other out, so that the greater number of voices on a given issue must be the opinion represented by the artificial person. This is certainly relevant to what Hobbes considers the role of, say, an elected representative in Parliament, but Hobbes has not yet quite gotten us out of the state of nature, has he? Whatever kinds of mutually beneficial contracts we can make with individuals or communities through the representation of this artificial personhood, we're making them in the background natural state of war or insecurity that defines our existence in Hobbes's state of nature. Yet Hobbes has given his natural man the tools to get out of the state of nature, namely that ability to willingly transfer our natural right to all, or at least a part of it, our reason and self-interested desire to seek peace, and this notion of artificial personhood, which is going to prove key. He's about to use all these tools to imagine an origin story for politics that would seemingly answer the problem presented by natural freedom. So in the next chapter, Hobbes imagines a constitutive moment of social contracting between all those naturally free agents who can thus voluntarily, via social contract, create the artificial person of political sovereignty. So recall that Hobbes's multitude is not a collective will, right? It's a multitude of individuals whose opinions can kind of cancel each other out until you get the majority opinion, and that can be represented by an artificial person, right? So there's no collective consent. Quoting from chapter 17, "For if we could suppose a great multitude of men to consent in the observation of justice and other laws of nature without a common power to keep them all in awe, we might as well suppose all mankind to do the same, and then there neither would be nor need to be any civil government or commonwealth at all, because there would be peace without subjection." End quote. But of course, Hobbes does not think that we can have peace without subjection, right? We only have the state of nature, which is a state of war. So how does the multitude of individuals institute civitas, or the commonwealth? The way to do this is, quote, "to confer all their powers and strength upon one man, or upon one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills by plurality of voices unto one will, which is as much to say, to appoint one man or assembly of men to bear their person, and every one to own and acknowledge himself to be author of whatsoever he that so beareth their person shall act, or cause to be acted, in those things which concern the common peace and safety, and therein to submit their wills, every one to his will, and their judgments to his judgment." End quote, from chapter 17. This is not merely consent, like in nature. Quoting again, "This is more than consent or concord. It is a real unity of them all, in one and the same person, made by covenant of every man with every man, in such manner as if every man should say to every man, I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or to this assembly of men on this condition, that thou give up thy right to him and authorize all his actions in like manner." End quote. Sovereignty and commonwealth come together in this artificial personhood, right? He gives here a definition of commonwealth, and in him, that great Leviathan of the mortal man, consisteth the essence of the commonwealth, which, to define it, is one person, artificial person, of whose acts a great multitude, by mutual covenants one with the other, with another, have made themselves every one the author, to the end he may use the strength and means of them all, as he shall think expedient for their peace and common defense. And then, really dramatically, he continues, "And he that carrieth this person is called sovereign, and said to have sovereign power, and everyone besides his subject." Right? So recall again, this is an artificial person that can be carried or born, right, by, yes, an individual human being, but it's not the individual acting as a natural person representing themselves, right? This is an artificial person that represents everyone and contains, is the product of all of this natural right that has been alienated to construct this artificial person, and it's being carried by, theoretically, say, an individual, mortal king. Okay, but what about after this initial generation of the Commonwealth, right? What is there something like tacit consent so long as there is peace? Maybe, possibly. This brings up the question of what later democratic theorists have come to call constituent power. The multitude is not a single will capable of collective action prior to the Leviathan. So how can they form the Leviathan, and who forms it? Hobbes seems to allow that some minority might not like the idea. But again, they'll be canceled out by others, and they can be made to obey. So that's fuzzy. Note well in chapter 29 on the causes of the dissolution of commonwealth, there is no right of rebellion. Rather, if there is civil war or disorder, it follows naturally, much like the laws of geometry from the causes Hobbes describes. For example, problem with the original founding institutions, non-absolute sovereignty, belief in non-absolute sovereignty, etc. It just simply follows like a law of physics, like gravity, that a commonwealth will dissolve into civil war or disorder, and thus potentially revert back to are sort of placed back into a state of nature. And here, the danger of private judgment really seems paramount for Hobbes, right? Chapter 29, Hobbes finds it not only dangerous, but logically absurd, since the Leviathan is literally all of the people's wills, right? We alienated our own will and our own natural right to govern ourselves and make judgments about governing ourselves. We've literally given it up in order to create the artificial person of the sovereign. So it just is definitionally, like, it just doesn't actually make sense to think we still have it and could thus be willing for ourselves and making these kind of judgments for ourselves, right? According to Hobbes's theory, quote, therefore, though he that is subject to no civil law sinneth in all he does against his conscience, because he has no other rule to follow but his own reason, yet it is not so with him that lives in a commonwealth, because the law is the public conscience, by which he hath already undertaken to be guided. So it follows for Hobbes that there's no division of sovereignty. Again, according to Hobbes's understanding, the sovereign is literally the sovereign because he, or in the case of a sovereign assembly, the assembly actually is at least the collective person. The assembly is carrying this artificial person that really is all the aggregate wills and power of the former multitude, now subjects because of that artificial personhood thing that he outlined back in his discussion of the state of nature. It wouldn't be possible for there to be multiple artificial persons bearing or representing the same multitude or the same people, because the artificial person is created by people transferring their right, right? And once it's transferred, it's gone. Quote, and therefore, if the king bear the person of the people, and the general assembly bear also the person of the people, and another assembly bear the person of a part of the people, they're not one person, nor one sovereign, but three persons and three sovereigns. And again, for Hobbes, this is just logically incoherent. This just doesn't make sense. It couldn't be the case that that's what's happening. And so I don't want to take too long. I do want to stop this before it gets to be too rambling, but please go back and read parts 1 and 2 of Hobbes. Continue reading. It's fantastic to read 3 and 4. Absolutely. But paying close attention to what Hobbes puts into his state of nature. What does Hobbes mean by this natural right of all to all? And how does that lead to both, interestingly enough, both a state of war and also what Hobbes thinks we would deduce from that condition, from living in that state of constant fear and threat, these natural laws, the natural law to seek peace. And then pay attention to how we are able to kind of suspend and alienate parts of our natural will within the state of nature to make covenants that we can keep in the state of nature, as well as having others make covenants on our behalf by representing us in the form of an artificial person, in order to make covenants that hold and can keep in the state of nature, because those tools, that's what's going to then allow us to leave the state of nature, to enter the civic state as subjects in a commonwealth, subject to the sovereign Leviathan, who is, according to Hobbes's understanding, the person or an assembly that bears the artificial person that is the creation of all of our alienated natural right. And so there's a really interesting connection there between us and the sovereign Leviathan. And this is where, to circle back to some notions of a little bit of a Hobbes is sometimes thought of as pretty hardcore in terms of almost authoritarian, his understanding of this absolutist sovereign. We can't go against that sovereign will, because in a literal, very real way for Hobbes, that public will, that sovereign person, artificial person, is made up of all of our natural, our alienated natural right is made up of our wills. We will it into being. So we can't will against our own will. So it just that just wouldn't make sense for Hobbes. So there's no right of rebellion. There's all sorts of things that I think maybe later liberals, we might find this a bit questionable. But for Hobbes, it's just part and parcel of making sense of what sovereignty is, this artificial person of the sovereign, what that is and what it entails, and how we got out of the state of nature, which is that state of freedom. So I hope this was helpful, and I'm really looking forward to everyone's questions and active participation in our synchronous class on Hobbes, Leviathan.